Hi, my name is Eva Steiner, and this is my project Psychotherapists Around the Globe. I am interviewing the psychotherapists around the world and asking them the same 8 questions. I am wondering how mental health profession is in their country. Today we are going to. Thank you for doing this interview with me. Before we start, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Thank you for inviting me. It is my pleasure. My name is Tijana Mirovic. I have a PhD in psychology. I'm also a psychotherapist. I come from Serbia.
Tell me a little bit about your culture. What is some holiday or tradition that your country celebrates? And if your culture would be an emotion, what emotion would it be?
As you know, 30 years ago, we used to belong to another country, which was called former Yugoslavia, and it was a communist country. So a lot of our culture and belief system revolved around this set of values. We celebrated Republic's Day and May 1st and holidays like this. Now, as I said, 30 years later, one thing that I think maybe makes us distinct is something called Slava. This is actually Family Saint Day. I know some other cultures have it too. The way we celebrate is, of course, very typical for this culture. It is something that is passed on from a male relative to a male relative. And women, if they get married, they get Slava from their husband, so they can change the saint day. Besides this, we also celebrate Christmas. We celebrate it on January 7th, like some other cultures and nations. It is a big family day. It's not celebrated widely, just within the family. We make a specific kind of bread. We have some interesting customs. We celebrate Easter. Easter was just recently, last week here. It's on May 5th this year. We still celebrate May 1st as a big holiday. That's something that's usually celebrated with friends more than with family. We go out, we barbecue or roast a lamb or something like this. These are the most common celebrations that we have. In terms of emotion, I was thinking a lot about this, and finally I kind of settled with excitement. And because one of the people I know who is not from the region, he said once, everything seems 5 times more here. The food has more flavor, extensively more flavor, like more than it should, or people are faster or more more emotional than they maybe need to be, or something like this. So I would say that we do share this excitement regarding a lot of things in life. Joy, like all these pleasant emotions. We laugh a lot. We use humor a lot, especially dark humor, which we needed because we've been through a lot in the last 30 years or 100 and so years. Depends where you want to start. We are big in sports, so if you're cheering for your favorite team, that's also something that is very, you're more than excited. It's almost like something to die for. Also, when it comes to other types of emotions, the ones that are not maybe that pleasant, I think we have a little bit on a plus side there too. There is a lot of anger that you can feel or sense. There's a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. When they test it, a lot of the times we would have the norm that is a little bit above average. And since, as I said, we had a lot of trauma, maybe that's related to that. But it is something that I think people would see if they would come. All of this. This is one of the reasons they choose to come and visit us, because there's a lot of fun. Belgrade, the capital of Serbia, is one of the party capitals of Europe, but they also see a lot of, as I said, stress, anxiety, speed, and things like this. And another thing that we see having a lot is pride and spite. We do a lot of things out of spite. So if you say, like, don't do this, we have a tendency to say, no, I am going to do it because you said no. So.
And how do you celebrate Slava?
It is mainly family celebration, but now it depends. People can invite big group of people and friends, or they can just celebrate it within the family. Usually in the morning you would go to church where they cut and bless this specific type of, again, cake or bread that we make. We would have a little bit nicer meal. It depends how religious one is, because it is a religious holiday, but people also celebrate it as something that is, as you said, more cultural. So, sometimes it's just a way to get people to come together, because that's one thing that I didn't mention, which is really big in our culture, that is spending time with friends and families. We are quite collectivistic in that sense, and that's very important for us. And we try to look for all the different ways and reasons to come together. So this would be one of them. And you can also celebrate for a couple of days, depending again. If you have more friends you want to invite, then maybe the first day you invite family, second day a smaller group of friends or larger group of friends. When people leave, and sadly we had a lot of people leave this country throughout these 30 years, that's one of the things that they would all miss. They would say, we miss these gatherings, and everything is an opportunity for gathering. Before, people even used to do it within the companies where they worked in. Now it's more amongst friends or family.
How did you become a psychotherapist in your country, and what is your therapeutic approach?
First, as I said, I studied psychology, and when I finished my university studying, I started with the cognitive behavioral therapy training, actually rational and motive behavior therapy to be exact, with some elements of cognitive behavioral therapy. But because at that time I was working in a school, I felt that I was missing some techniques or some ways to work with families as well. So I wanted to just have a shorter training in family therapy, but I really liked it. So I finally also got training in systemic family therapy. And then at some point, I kind of looked for the ways to integrate these two. I was also at that point in my master's degree studies. So I wanted something to research. And my mentor said, there's this relatively new approach called schema therapy. Maybe this would be interesting for you because it is integrative and also deals with family, deals with cognitive behavioral approach, also some experiential. So I started to learn a little bit about it. I decided to research it for my master's and my PhD. And finally, I decided to get trained in schema therapy. And now I am schema therapist. I'm also trainer and supervisor. And I'm really happy to say that I brought schema therapy to the region, to all the former Yugoslav countries, and also in Bulgaria and in Greece at one moment. And so this is my first and last contact with therapy, I would say.
And in general, how do you become a psychotherapist in Serbia? Do you need to be psychologist, or can you go directly to the approach and work with people?
We don't have a law that would regulate the way in which you become psychotherapists. So what we have is an association where people who had trainings, who were trainers, they sat together and they looked into European regulations, and basically they decided to follow those of European Association of Psychotherapy. So in general, you can be a psychologist or psychiatrist or some humanistically trained person and go in psychotherapy training directly. And once you finish the training, and of course there are, I don't know if we need to go into this, but there are a lot of hours of therapy, of training itself, then of self-therapy, of supervisions, sometimes intervision. So it's a demand, but it's not specific to Serbia. It's something that, as I said, we copied from European Association of Psychotherapists. And for a long time, this was the only way. Then recently, I don't know how recently, maybe, I don't know, a decade or so ago, they allowed also for people who are from other university trainings, meaning they don't have to be humanistic. They can also become psychotherapists, but they have to have additional, I don't know the name in English, but propedeutics or something like this, which is basically a certain number of exams that you need to study and pass, and then you have the right to be called psychotherapist. Before that, you can use it, work under supervision, and get your trainings. But to be called psychotherapist right now, you need to have this. But since it is not regulated, like in most countries where it's not regulated, sadly, we cannot say that people follow this 100%. And, there are a lot of people who call themselves therapists or neglect to say that they work under supervision while they work, or they're just counselors, which you can get after 2 years of additional training. So we have a little bit of a mess there, but this is the official way, as I told you. Also here, if you are a psychologist, you can do a psychological counseling. So you're allowed to do this, but you cannot be called psychotherapist.
And for the psychology, is there law?
Yes, there is. We're again trying to renew some things, so there's always talk about maybe changes, but yeah, it's been here for some time now.
And this is my assumption because a lot of professors come from Serbia to Slovenia to give lecture about certain approaches. So I assume you have a lot of approaches there, a lot of possibility to educate yourself as a psychotherapist.
Well, I think this is the thing with former Yugoslavia. We kind of exchanged this, we were initially all trained from people who came abroad. Then there were some people from Croatia coming here, or people from here coming to Croatia or Slovenia. Yes, you're right. Well, there are some of us who are still giving trainings in Slovenia as well, and other countries. Serbia is, in terms of number of people, the biggest one of all former Yugoslav countries. So I think it makes sense to kind of start many things here and then develop it outside. But it's not the only way. As I said, we have a lot of trainers coming from other areas as well. And we still, of course, have also trainers who come from abroad. But we do try to have it in our own language because, as you know, it's more recommended.
How society looks upon psychotherapy or any psychological help?
I had a counseling center for 15 years, so this is the period that I know for sure that in these 15 years things have changed. At the beginning, when we started working, people would come to therapy, of course, but they weren't very open in discussing that they are doing therapy. Sometimes they would say that they don't want their family to know or their friends to know. I have an anecdote because at the beginning I worked in the same place where my mother had dental office. So some clients would comment how it's great because then people think that they're seeing a dentist and not a therapist. So it was like that. A lot of stigma, typical stigma, nothing special for our society. I think, messages such as this is weakness, you should be able to handle your problems on your own, especially, of course, for male clients, or this is something that just spoiled or lazy people do. There was also this myth or saying that this is influence from America, now everybody wants to have a therapist and things like this. But over the years, and I think like everywhere in the world, maybe especially with Corona and the problems relating this, people have really opened up. We have a lot of articles in the magazines. We have a lot of shows on television. We have a lot of roundtables or podcasts now that are widely watched and discussed. People are more open to, even by their name, say that they have a certain problem, because there are, of course, social media helps. There are a lot of groups for this or that problem or for support. So, you see now that it's changed, and now we have a problem, like in most countries, I think, that there seem not to be enough therapists, or at least well-trained or experienced therapists. It's very difficult to find. If people call and ask for an appointment and you cannot accept them, it's very difficult to find someone who can. So I think that things have changed a lot, and that it's now looked upon as something like healthy, taking care of your mental health, something that we should all have. You will hear this on the street, or when you tell people what do you do, I often hear is, we should all go to the therapist. This would be so good if we all could. But if we talk about again, as I said, when you don't have a regulation, that says something also. So it's not all positive. And if we look at not just at the private sector, but if we also look at the state-run facilities, they're horribly understaffed, which means that, obviously our society or our government doesn't think that this is something worth investing in. There is, huge waiting list there too. The people who work there, like psychiatrists or psychologists or even therapists, are really swamped with number of people. A lot of places do not offer psychotherapy, so it's more like, okay, we'll come and see you once a month, or just look at the medication stuff. So if we look from that point of view, then I would say that we haven't really moved far.
What is your society teaching about child-parent relationship, and whether this value of society also influence how you designed your intervention as a therapist?
Again, I have to start with the change because it seems to be a lot of change in this, and I think it's also global, not probably just related to our society. But when I was growing up, which was like, I don't know, 35, 40 years ago, and especially even people who are older than me, especially if we talk about our parents, parenthood used to be very strict. Like a parent was like a boss, so you don't really question what they say or do. And there was a lot of authority in this. There was a lot of power. Children were seen as somebody who should just obey or who should take care of parents' needs primarily, so not the other way around. This was similar also in schools. Teachers had freedom to do or to say whatever they want. They had the freedom to discipline, and a lot of the times, when it came to school, they had last say, not the parents. I think it influenced our practices because we didn't react to some of the things that we would definitely react to now. A couple of, I think, weeks ago or months ago, there was a video from, I think, 70s or 80s, where they interview school children, I think third grade, elementary school, and they ask them, are your parents beating you? And they were like, yeah, they are. They weren't saying it with a smile or like it's the most normal thing. And this was on TV. So when you look at it, you kind of think, okay, how come we didn't respond to this? What was going on back then? But I think that it was normalized, that we didn't know so much maybe about the problem with corporal punishment or with abuse. So I think it influenced also our views. Nowadays, like everywhere in the world, you have almost the opposite trend, where there's no discipline a lot of the times, when we have a feeling, nobody's going to say it openly, but you will hear it from time to time in kind of a little bit off way, that any kind of limit or any kind of punishment introduced to children is a possible trauma, and that like, we don't want to stress them out, they're just kids, they need to do whatever they want to do. There's a lot of overprotection, especially in lack of limit setting, and there's a lot of entitlement, in a sense that we give children too much of everything, even material things, but also too much freedom to do certain things. And we see now that it's taking its toll. And I think that as psychotherapists now, we of course know much more about the development, we know much more about developmental trauma. So we try to respond to this. We try to send this message that this is not a healthy parenting, that this is also a form of neglect, because if you're not giving your children autonomy, or you're not giving them any limits, that's the problem. We try to design our intervention, especially within chemotherapy, called this limited reparenting, to give our clients what they lacked growing up, and to try to prevent by informing parents about basic childhood needs and why children need them, and what happens if these needs are not met. So we try to respond to this, but changes are kind of happening fast, and I don't know how fast we are responding to this. If we have to go to cultural thing, one of the things that struck me as, I think, important when it comes to parent and child relation is, especially in that time when parents were the bosses, and we still have this, I have to say, it is very wrong. This is the message that you get. It's very wrong to be angry at your parents or to have any kind of grievance with your parents. Like, parents are always right and they always mean well. And, even if they did something wrong, that's out of love and nothing else. So I think it really makes things difficult in a way, because if you want to help the clients, especially clients with developmental trauma, you have to go through this anger too. You have to send a message, clear message, something they did was awfully wrong, and something they did, did not necessarily come out of love. Yeah, most things do, but some don't. And this is very unpopular. Not just culturally, but sometimes it influences our practices, because I see that a lot of people are still being trained with this message. You cannot be angry at your parents, so they try to make them accepting too soon, or you have to forgive. That's another thing in order to be okay. And there is a lot of guilt inducing still, and that's something that characterizes our parenthood in our society. I think I mentioned a lot of the times it was the message that you as a child need to take care of your parents' needs. Like, you have to behave so the neighbors will not think bad of me as a parent, or you have to listen to my complaints, or you have to be there for me, or you were a bad child or selfish child if you're not doing this or that. I think it's a big cultural issue, and sometimes we don't address this enough, because of course we are these children too as therapists, so it's not easy sometimes to address it. So we continue to kind of not address this guilt-inducing, not just when a parent does it to a child, but when we start doing it to ourselves. A lot of the times we would support self-sacrifice in a way. We would also say, but it's nice to be nice, especially in women. So there is a gender thing as well. Women should be giving, they should take care of others, they should put others first, and then themselves in the same way as men should be, strong and non-vulnerable and stuff. And I'm glad to say that now with this smart trends coming also from the West, like Brené Brown with her vulnerability talk and all this, it is also influencing our practices. And so we are changing as psychotherapists to be more responsive to the actual needs and to change these narratives that we have. But if we look back, I would say that that's something that we maybe could have done better throughout the years.
What are the learned beliefs regarding client-therapist relationship, and can the relationship continue outside the therapy once the therapy process is over?
What we were taught, I'm not sure in which of these trainings, but what they told us is for some reason that 3 years have to pass before you can have any kind of non-therapeutic contact with the client. For me personally, I don't have personal contacts with any of my former clients. I did as a beginner, of course, make some mistakes and learn from them. But now as I talk, I think that these 3 years are a short period. And I'm not sure why was it mentioned 3 years? Because what you see in practice is that sometimes your old clients return after 3 years or 5 years or 10 years or 15 years or whatever. So it's good to keep this place open and to keep the seat warm so that they can come back if we get into this contact that of course makes things very, very difficult. That's one of the things that I heard about this. I'm not sure what the current did it change or would they advise differently. When we need to educate people about a lot of the things, client therapy relationship included. So I don't know if there are some certain beliefs that I could take out and say this is what people believe. But I see sometimes when people come that they're not sure what kind of a relationship that should be. They know something by watching the American movies, and we know that it's not always portrayed in the best or closest way. Sometimes the client asks, can we use, because we don't have like in English, just you.
Like a formally addressing the person.
Yes, I think they have it in German, in Spanish, not in English. So sometimes they would say, well, but can we be in this kind of less formal way, or we're the same year, or it's the same like friendship or something. So then sometimes you have to explain that it's not it. There are some people, this is rare, but who were confused about, like, okay, we are talking, should I be paying for talking? This is some sort of support. It's not like going to a real doctor where they measure something or they give you medication or something. So but I'm talking about way back more than current moment. Of course, like anywhere else, I think there is belief or myth sometimes that the therapy should be fast. You should give me some specific answers or some specific help. So we tend to neglect the relationship, I think. And I think if we look at what was and what's now, is maybe that before we didn't focus so much on therapy relationship. It was more on techniques, and we were trained mostly to use techniques and, kind of touch upon therapy relationship, but not so much. And I think that nowadays, or at least with the therapies that I follow, we give so much more emphasis on therapy relationship. And now most clients would know this and say, this is the most important things. Again, some therapists, some clients might think differently, and they might say, no, we need things that work, we need specific answers, we need to stop the anxiety as soon as possible or something like this. But I think that we value relationship more.
The sixth question, is supervision a must for a therapist in your country?
Yeah, it is definitely a must. It's one of these asked for things in the European requirement, but also it's almost really impossible to learn therapy if you are not supervised, because it's one thing to go to trainings and to practice in group. It's another thing if you have one-on-one time or group time with a trainer and supervisor who can see you work, who can give you feedback. In a lot of the trainings, it's also mandatory to at some point bring some tape, audio or videotape, so that they can actually see your work, because again, as a supervisor, I can say this, it's completely different when you see someone act and when they tell you about what they did, not in terms that they're lying or anything like this, but just, you can see so much more or hear much more if you're present. So yes, supervision is very important, and I think that it's very important sometimes when we are in a role of a client to also ask this question: were you supervised, or are you still under supervision? Because that can also show us how well trained or how well trained the
Ethical.
person is. Yeah, ethical. Yeah. Also, which I would add is that a part of supervision, a lot of the times, is some sort of maybe not self-therapy, but some look within yourself. And a part of supervision is also having your supervisor as some sort of a mirror that would say, okay, I see this, or I sense this, or I think, the problem with you and this client might be that you also are involved in something of your own. And I think it's very important, because we are humans and we are people, and we use ourselves, as I said, in a relationship, and we use ourselves not just as experts, but we use ourselves as Diana or as Eva. So we need to make sure that we are using a healthy part of ourselves and not some part that we're not even aware of, but is there and is coming out to fix or fight the client or whatever it is that we might need from that part. So I think supervision is very important. And I would also advise it that it doesn't stop once we get accredited, which is sadly mostly the case, but that we continue to have it from time to time, because even as experienced therapists, we do have a lot of room for learning and growing and for getting feedback.
In case of the abuse, so let's say the therapist is crossing the line, do you have any organization where the client can turn to?
Yes, I mentioned earlier, I think that we have this association. It is consisted of not all, but most of the therapy training schools or associations, so in different forms of psychotherapy. And this association, this is the Union of Serbian Psychotherapy Associations or something like this. It has their ethical guidelines, so we are all obliged, if we're members, to follow these ethical guidelines. Also, if you're a psychologist, let's say, we also have our psychology association has its own ethical guidelines. Of course, this is not different from one another, but you are obliged to follow both of this. And if the client is unsatisfied, feels that you did something that is not ethical, they can make a complaint. There is always an ethical committee within these organizations, and then they're supposed to look into it and decide what to do.
What are the most common complaints that the client comes to therapy for?
I will try to be objective here because my specialty is trauma, developmental and war trauma. So of course I have most clients who come with these problems, with complex PTSD or PTSD per se. But of course, I supervise and know a lot of therapists, so I see that I think it's not different than other places. Mostly anxiety, depression, a lot of marital or couples issues, problems with children. So these are typical things. What we have maybe a tad more than in some other countries is the trauma issue, because as I said, there are a lot of problems with parenting before, so it has left its mark. And also we had a lot of war trauma and other traumatic experiences like earthquakes, floods, almost everything, school shooting last. So this is something that maybe we see a little bit more than in other countries.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me more about war trauma?
Well, in the 90s, we had a couple of wars specifically we were involved in, but they were also going through the region. We also, speaking now of Serbia, had economic sanctions from the rest of the world. So we had big economic crisis, hyperinflation. There was a big problem in the 90s to basically stay alive and prosper normally and function normally. Of course, in other parts of former Yugoslavia, there was a war and there was hunger related to war. So there are a lot of, when we say war trauma, we're actually talking about a lot of traumas within that big bag that covers all of it. War trauma is also sometimes being separated from your loved ones. A lot of people took refuge from war, so they went to another country or another part of the country. where usually males stayed fighting, so they were separated in that sense. It is also sometimes not knowing what happened to your loved ones. Unfortunately, in this region, we had a lot of missing people because they were kidnapped and never found in all areas, and these families are still struggling to, of course, I mean, it's very hard to believe that these people are alive 30 years later, but of course, this hope never dies, and this is something that you're trying to find a way to live with. Also, we had bombing in the 90s. So that was another kind of trauma within these sanctions. It was not just about the food or money. It was also, we were banned from, we couldn't enter into many countries. Our sportsmen were banned from entering competitions. So there's a lot of trauma coming from this segregation and discrimination. And I think if we are honest with each other and with ourselves in the first place, I think we all carry some sort of a burden from this. Because even if we talk about war specifically, even if we're not involved in a war per se, we know someone who has. We said at the beginning that we are collective culture, and family is a big thing here. I used to work with refugees a lot, and one of the facts that was different in former Yugoslavia from the rest of the world is that majority of our refugees were housed within the family. So, like in my family, we had our relatives from Sarajevo coming and staying with us for years, and this is something that was quite typical. So even if you were not directly involved, you know someone who has, and in a way that the war came to your ground. And of course, war trauma is very difficult because it completely shakes your belief system. It doesn't have to change it forever, but it definitely influences it. There is a term used in psychotherapy called shattered assumptions about the benevolence of the world, about other people and stuff, because it's a man-made trauma. In this region, it was especially difficult because these are people who knew each other a lot of the times, not always, but a lot of the times, especially if we talk about Bosnia. So a lot of the times these were neighbors, these were people who you had some connection with, and that of course really shakes your ground. Again, it doesn't have to change your view, but it shakes it in a way like, is it possible that people who I know can do this? For me personally, working with this, even when I didn't know these people, it shook me thinking, is it possible that people are able to do this to one another? Because it was not just war in terms of like two armies fighting each other. There was a lot of atrocities. There was a lot of crimes within the war, mass rapes of women, horrible things. And that's the sad reality that we live in, that, that there are people who had it worse. You continue to be shocked, which I think is good that we can be shocked with it. It means that we still kind of expect more, but that even, these years later, you can still get shocked with some of the stories and some of the things that people live through. When you ask me about the emotion, I wanted to find an emotion that captures both, positive and negative aspects, because when you look with what people went through, yes, we have a lot of consequences of this, but also there's so much resilience. And I think that's one thing that we can also say as an emotion that makes us who we are and that we can identify with, because people survived all of this and they, stood their ground and they continued living together, and that they find a way to make some sense out of all of it.
If you would share one tool, belief, or approach that is a must-have for you as a therapist, what would it be?
I don't know if it's a tool or approach, but I think we need to focus on therapy relationship, and we need to be humans, and we need to be two human beings in contact. It's important to know that we cannot always make therapy is not pleasant in itself, and we cannot always make it the satisfying or a happy place for our clients. But I think what we need to strive for is to make it a safe place for our clients. And I think if there is one thing that we need to do and to really work on, this is it. Meaning, as I said, that they don't have to always agree with us, or us with them. We don't always have to see eye to eye about things. We can use things that they don't like sometimes because it's needed. As I said, it needs to be painful. It cannot all be easy. Or maybe we are pushing something that we don't see that it's not appropriate for them. So we do make mistakes, and that's okay. But I think that it's important to know that they need to feel safe with us and within our relationship, because then if we do hurt them or if we do make mistakes like in any other relationship, having confidence in us and feeling safe with us will help them overcome it, but it can also enhance our relationship, because they will see that we are able to be there for them, that we will be able to hear them, to say I'm sorry if there's something to say I'm sorry about, that we are willing to adjust to them, make it a safe space. That's sometimes really practical things. Do you feel okay sitting here with me? Is there anything that you would need to make to feel better, or to, is the light okay? It's small simple things like this that say, I want to make this our place, not, you came to me and you sit in this chair and you do what I think you should do, or you talk about what I think you should talk about. I know that nobody says it this way, but sometimes we do send this message because we're so safe in our trainings and in techniques and things like this that we forget about this basic and human thing.